And so as I started to look into this, what I realized was that, this is ancient wisdom. Clearly, it's in indigenous cultures' wisdom to find healing in nature. But even going back to the beginning of Western culture, Aristotle wrote about walking around the walls of Athens is healing. And Darwin talked about it, Virginia Woolf, Einstein. So great thinkers have been thinking about it for years, but somehow it avoided the medical world. Frederick Law Olmsted, who is this designer and architect who designed Central Park in New York, and this is Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. He wrote, "Nature employs the mind without fatigue and yet exercises it. It tranquilizes it, yet enlivens it, and thus through the influences of mind over body gives the effect of refreshing rest and invigorating the system as a whole." And what we found, it took more than 100 years before health researchers started to investigate, but this is exactly what they found. As I was preparing this subject and learning about it and reading about it, I was always shouting to my wife. She's an epidemiologist at UCSF and is good at data and good at being skeptical of studies. And I would say, "Oh, hey, if you live near a forest, you might live longer. Oh, if you go for a walk in a pretty place, you may have less knee pain." And she said, "Leif, you got to be careful with all these studies. These are the kind of studies that are prone to be full of biases and confounding. So you got to make sure you're not talking about things as they're a settled scientific affair on some of this skimpy data." But as I looked into it, I realized there's been thousands of studies, literally over the last few years, looking at different populations, different parts of the world, using different sensory organs, different environmental settings. There are studies about lower blood pressure coming out of Japan, lower cortisol levels, that's stress hormone levels, done by my dear friend Dr. Keltner in Yosemite National Park, lower pain scores in China, less back pain with walking in green spaces in Austria, lower length of stay in the USA, less pain living near green spaces in Great Britain. So this is just the beginning of what's a huge body of science now. And I'm going to go into some of it here with you. But where did this all start? Well, this all started with this guy, Dr. Qing Li. He is a Japanese physician who actually dropped out of his first year of medical school. He was so stressed that he just couldn't figure out how to get through. And he spent the year hiking and spending times in the woods, and he just felt better. And he decided that what he would do was dedicate his life to trying to bring this to other people and understand it and make it a legitimate part of the scientific endeavor that we carry out in medicine. In his first studies, he found that he could lower blood pressure 5 points by people spending time in natural settings. And that in fact, after an episode in the forest, they would have lower cortisol levels, stress hormone levels for days. And he also measured increased heart rate variability, which is a sign of a healthy parasympathetic tone as opposed to that stress sympathetic tone. And so working with his Japanese colleagues, they coined this term Shinru Yoku, which is the transliteration is forest bathing, or it's really sort of taking in the atmosphere of the forest. Or as Teresa would have said, it's like really being part of the forest. It's more than just sitting there. It's sort of absorbing it, absorbing the wisdom of the forest. And there are now about 100 places in Japan that are formally designated as being proven to have health effects. And it's kind of crazy. You can actually go there and they can measure your blood pressure, or they can measure your heart rate, skin tension tests they do to sort of make sure that it's helping. And now more than 25% of people in Canada, in Japan, take place in these formal forest bathing activities. It's also equally big in Korea, and it's embraced by the government as a pillar in their healthcare system. And why that is, I think it's because these places were extremely have high levels of stress. There's a word for working yourself to death in Japanese. And in Korea, they have the highest suicide rates of anywhere. I think it's very competitive, very crowded, stressed out place. But also, I think it ties back to culture. These places have deep ties to deep animistic traditions, traditions of the natural world being alive and full of spirits. And I think there in Japan, there's really nothing more sacred than these cedar forests. And these trees are like deities. And so to go to these places for healing just made sense. In fact, now in both these countries, you can get a medical specialty in forest bathing and get special training on how to do this work. It's come to the point where in both these countries, the director of forestry has a degree in social science from North America.